Papers. Immigration check.
I'm a U.S. Marshal. My credentials are in my purse.
We've heard that before. Proof of legal status.
Call my field office to verify. Southern District, California. I'm complying.
Step out of the vehicle.
My daughter is in the car. I'm a federal officer. You're violating protocol.
Step out, now.
Target parking lot, San Diego. Saturday, 3:22 p.m. Her 12-year-old daughter, Sophia, sat frozen beside her. 3 ICE agents surrounded the car, body cameras already recording what would become the most expensive parking lot stop in California history. That moment cost the government $17.8 million. Deputy Marshal Carmen Reyes, 18 years federal service, 187 fugitive arrests, commendations from the Attorney General, and one thing the agent at her window didn't know: a law degree from UC Berkeley constitutional law focus earned in secret while working the job. She knew exactly which rights they were violating. She knew exactly how to make them pay. If you want to see authority dismantled by someone who spent years learning how, drop a comment where you're watching from. The target run was supposed to be simple. School supplies for Sophia, new notebooks and pens before the semester started. Carmen had just loaded the last bag into the trunk when the unmarked white van pulled up behind her SUV, blocking her exit. 3 agents stepped out. Derek Vasquez led the approach, 34 years old, 7 years with ICE. Linda Tran moved to the passenger side. Marcus Cole positioned himself near the rear bumper. Their formation was tactical, deliberate. Their body cameras were already recording. Vasquez approached Carmen's window. She'd already returned to the driver's seat, hands visible on the wheel. Sophia sat beside her, quiet, watching. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We're conducting a compliance sweep in this area. Carmen kept her voice level. I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Carmen Reyes, Batch 2847, Southern District of California. My credentials are in my purse on the passenger floor. Vasquez didn't look at the purse. We need proof of legal status, driver's license, and documentation. My credentials prove my status. Call my field office to verify. The number's on the card. He didn't reach for his radio. Everyone claims something. I need documentation now. Carmen gestured slowly toward her purse. My federal credentials are documentation. This is a Fourth Amendment issue. You're detaining a federal officer without cause. A Target security officer, Brian Mills, had noticed the confrontation from near the entrance. He started walking toward them. 2 cars over an off-duty firefighter named Jake Peterson was loading groceries into his truck. He paused, watching. In the minivan parked beside Carmen's SUV, a mother with 3 kids in the back pulled out her phone. Vasquez hadn't called dispatch. He hadn't verified anything. He was running on visual assessment, an authority he thought was absolute. That was his first mistake. Carmen reached slowly for her purse. Vasquez's hand shot to his belt. Don't reach for anything. My credentials are inside. You asked for documentation. Step out of the vehicle. Now. Carmen kept her hands visible. I'm invoking my rights under Title 18 United States Code Section 111. I'm a federal law enforcement officer. You have no authority to detain me without probable cause. My daughter is a minor. This is being recorded. Vasquez stared at her. We have authority here. He had no idea what he'd just done. His hand closed around Carmen's wrist. She didn't resist. Tran moved to the passenger side, leaning down to peer through the window at Sophia. The girl pressed back against her seat. Cole stepped closer to the rear bumper, cutting off any exit route. You're making a career-ending mistake, Carmen said. Her voice stayed level. I'm complying with your orders. Let me retrieve my federal credentials and verify my identity through dispatch. Vasquez pulled harder. Out, now! Jake Peterson, the firefighter 2 cars over, had his phone up. Recording. Hey, she said she's a U.S. Marshal. Brian Mills, the Target security officer, was already on his radio. I need San Diego PD to the north parking lot. Federal agents detaining someone. It's escalating. The woman in the minivan had her phone out too, camera pointed directly at Carmen's window. Her 3 kids watched from the back seat, silent. Sophia's voice cracked. Mom. Carmen turned her head slightly, keeping her eyes on Vasquez. Baby, stay calm. Don't move. Everything's okay. But it wasn't okay. Vasquez opened Carmen's door. Tran stayed at the passenger window, blocking Sophia's view. Cole moved in from behind. The formation was textbook, tactical, 3-on-1. Except the one was a federal officer with 18 years of experience who knew exactly what unlawful detention looked like because she'd testified against it in court. "I'm not resisting," Carmen said loudly, "for the cameras, for the witnesses, for the record that would matter later. I've identified myself as Deputy U.S. Marshal Carmen Reyes. I've requested verification through official channels. You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You're detaining a federal officer without reasonable suspicion." Vasquez wasn't listening. He grabbed her arm, pulling her from the vehicle. "Mom!" Sophia's cry carried across the parking lot. Peterson shouted again. "Someone call the real cops. This is wrong." Mills spoke into his radio, urgent now. "Officer needs assistance. Child involved. Multiple witnesses. Cameras rolling." More phones came out. A teenager near the cart returned. An elderly couple by the entrance. A Target employee who'd stepped outside for a break. Carmen's feet hit the pavement. Vasquez spun her around, pushing her against the side of the SUV, her face pressed against the warm metal. Inside the vehicle, Sophia was crying, her small hands pressed against the window. "You're violating federal law," Carmen said. Her voice didn't shake. "This is assault on a federal officer. This is unlawful detention. This is deprivation of rights under color of authority." Vasquez pulled her wrist behind her back. The handcuffs were coming out. "Would you stay silent if you saw this happen to a federal officer and her 12-year-old daughter in a parking lot on a Saturday afternoon? Drop a comment, yes or no. Tell me what you'd do." The handcuffs clicked shut. Metal bit into Carmen's wrists, cold, sharp, tight. "Mom!" Sophia's scream cut through the parking lot. "Mom, mom, mom." 7 times, the body cameras caught everyone. Carmen didn't pull away, didn't struggle. "I'm not resisting. This is unlawful seizure under color of federal authority. You're violating Title 42 United States Code Section 1983, Civil Rights Deprivation." The crowd had grown, 15 people now, maybe 20, all watching, all recording. Vasquez pushed Carmen toward the van. "Mom, don't take her." Sophia's voice cracked on the last word. Tran stayed at the SUV, blocking the passenger door, blocking Sophia from getting out. The girl's hands pressed against the window, her face wet with tears. Brian Mills, the security officer, approached the vehicle carefully. "Honey, what's your name? What's your mom's name?" "Sophia. Sophia Reyes. My mom's a Marshal. They can't." "We're getting help. Stay in the car. You're safe." Jake Peterson was already giving his information to another bystander. "Jake Peterson, San Diego Fire Department, off duty. I'm a witness. I recorded the whole thing. Here's my number." The minivan mom moved closer to Sophia's window. 3 kids in her back seat watching. "Sweetie, I'm staying right here. I'm not leaving until your mom comes back." Vasquez slid the van door open, pushed Carmen inside. The space smelled like stale coffee and equipment. Dim, no windows except a small one near the roof. The door slammed shut. That moment changed everything. Carmen sat on the metal bench, hands cuffed behind her back. 18 years of training ticked in. Not as victim, as investigator. Mental catalog, no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion. Visual profiling only. Refused verification 4 times. Refused supervisor contact. Detained federal officer without authority. Excessive force in public space. Child witness present. Trauma inflicted on minor. Unlawful seizure. Fourth Amendment violation. Civil rights deprivation under federal statute. Assault on federal officer. She ran through each violation like a checklist. Precise, clinical. Because she wasn't just a marshal who knew procedure. She was an attorney who knew exactly which laws carried consequences and exactly how much those consequences cost. The van started moving. Outside in the parking lot, Peterson was on his phone. "Yes, San Diego police. Target North Lot. ICE agents just detained someone who says she's a U.S. Marshal. There's a child involved, 12 years old, crying, multiple witnesses. We need someone here now." Mills stayed near Sophia's SUV. The girl was still crying, softer now, scared. The radio in Mills's hand crackled. "Units responding, ETA 4 minutes. 47 minutes. That's how long Carmen would be detained. 47 minutes from the moment Vasquez put his hand on her arm to the moment the handcuffs finally came off. Inside the van, Carmen's wrists ached. The metal had already left marks. She shifted position, tested the cuffs, standard issue. Too tight, deliberately tight. Evidence. All of it, every second. The van slowed, turned, stopped. San Diego police cruiser pulled into the Target parking lot. Lights on, no sirens. 2 officers stepped out. Peterson approached immediately. Officers, thank God, they just took a woman. She identified herself as a U.S. Marshal. Badge 2847, they wouldn't verify. Her daughter's still in that SUV, 12 years old, alone. Mills joined them. Brian Mills, Target Security. I witnessed the whole thing. She complied with every order, told them exactly who she was. They refused to call it in. Multiple cameras recorded it, mine included. The first SDPD officer looked at the ICE van, then at the SUV where Sophia sat, then at the crowd of witnesses, phones still out. Where are the agents? Vasquez stepped forward. ICE, we detained someone during a compliance sweep. Detained who? Immigration violation. The officer's expression shifted. The woman claims she's a federal marshal. People claim a lot of things. Did you verify? Vasquez hesitated. Just a second, but it was enough. Did you run her credentials? Call her office, check her badge number. Silence. Where is she now? Vasquez gestured toward the van. The SDPD officer walked to the vehicle, opened the door, saw Carmen sitting inside, hands cuffed behind her back. Federal officer. Detained. No explanation, no paperwork, no justification. Who is she? We're processing who is she. We don't have confirmation yet. The officer pulled his radio. Dispatch, I need verification on a federal marshal. Badge number 2847, last name Reyes, first name Carmen, U.S. Marshal Service. 30 seconds of silence. Then confirmed, Deputy U.S. Marshal Carmen Reyes, active duty, Southern District of California, 18 years service. Clean record. The officer looked at Vasquez. Vasquez's face went white. The SDPD officer turned to Vasquez. Take the cuffs off, now. Vasquez didn't move. That's a federal officer you just detained for 47 minutes without cause. Release her. The van door opened. Carmen stepped out into the sunlight, wrists still bound behind her back. Vasquez approached with the key. His hands shook slightly as he unlocked the cuffs. The metal released. Carmen's wrists were red-marked where the steel had pressed too tight. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She walked straight to her SUV where Sophia sat with the minivan mom still standing guard outside. Carmen opened the passenger door. Sophia threw her arms around her mother's neck. I'm okay, baby. I'm right here. The SDPD officers took statements. Peterson provided his contact information and footage. Mills did the same. The minivan mom gave her name and phone number. 3 other witnesses stepped forward with their recordings. One of the officers ran a background check on Derek Vasquez while they waited for ICE supervision to arrive. The results came back within minutes. 3 formal complaints filed against him between 2021 and 2023. All involved allegations of racial profiling during immigration sweeps. None had resulted in disciplinary action. No suspensions, no retraining requirements, no marks on his official record. The pattern was clear. This wasn't Vasquez's first mistake. It was just the first one that had been thoroughly documented, with a victim who knew exactly what recourse looked like. 2 weeks later, Carmen sat in a downtown San Diego conference room across from attorney Rachel Kim. Rachel specialized in federal civil rights cases and had reviewed all the evidence body camera footage from 3 angles cell phone videos from 6 witnesses, medical documentation of Carmen's wrist injuries, psychological evaluation showing trauma symptoms in both Carmen and Sophia. This is the strongest case I've seen in 15 years, Rachel said, spreading the documents across the table. The government will want to settle, probably fast. These cases are expensive to fight and even more expensive to lose. Carmen nodded. Good. Most clients in your position take the settlement. Federal litigation is time-consuming, stressful, public, and there's always risk. I want a trial. Rachel looked up. Can I ask why, babe? Because settlements come with non-disclosure agreements. They bury what happened. They protect the system that allows this to happen. I want a public trial. I want a verdict. I want it on record. Rachel studied her for a moment. You understand the legal system well. I have a JD from UC Berkeley, Carmen said. Constitutional law focus, passed the California bar in 2011. I know exactly what they violated. I know exactly what the precedent is. And I want my daughter to see that justice doesn't just happen in private settlements where the truth gets hidden. I want her to see it work in public. Rachel smiled. Then we go to trial. The first settlement offer arrived 3 weeks after filing. $400,000 in exchange for dismissal with prejudice and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Carmen read the offer once, then put it aside. No. The second offer came 2 months later after discovery had revealed the full extent of the evidence in Vasquez's complaint history. $750,000. Same terms. Carmen didn't even finish reading it. Some things aren't for sale, she told Rachel. My daughter watched federal agents handcuff her mother in a Target parking lot because of the color of her skin. She sat alone in that car while strangers tried to comfort her because the people who were supposed to protect her rights were violating them. That's not something I can put a dollar amount on. That's not something I can agree never to talk about again. Rachel nodded. I'll let them know we're proceeding. The attorneys for the federal government weren't prepared for that answer. Most plaintiffs took the money. Most wanted the case to end quietly. Most didn't have 18 years of federal law enforcement experience and a law degree backing up their determination to see the fight through to a public verdict. Carmen wasn't most plaintiffs. She'd spent nearly 2 decades enforcing the law. She knew how the system worked from the inside. She knew its strengths and its failures. She knew where power lived and how it protected itself. And she knew that real change didn't happen in sealed settlement agreements. It happened in courtroom verdicts that set precedent and created consequences too public to ignore. The government made one more offer before trial. $1.2 million. Carmen refused. Carmen rejected $750,000 to fight this publicly. Some people think she should have taken the money and moved on. Others think she made the only choice that mattered. What do you think? Was she right to demand a trial? Drop a comment. Let me know where you stand. The trial preparation took 4 months. Carmen worked alongside Rachel Kim, reviewing every frame of footage, every witness statement, every procedural failure. She used her law degree the way it was meant to be used as a weapon against institutional abuse. During discovery, Carmen flagged inconsistencies in the agent's depositions. Vasquez claimed he'd felt threatened. The body camera showed Carmen's hands on the steering wheel, visible, non-threatening. Tran testified they'd followed standard protocol. The footage showed 4 refusals to verify credentials through official channels. Cole said the detention was brief. The timestamp showed 47 minutes. The trial began on a cold morning in February at the federal courthouse in downtown San Diego. The courtroom was packed, off-duty federal marshals in the gallery, community activists, media. Carmen wore her dress uniform, her service medals visible, her bearing that of someone who'd spent 18 years commanding authority in dangerous situations. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Rachel played the synchronized footage, 3 body cameras, and 6 cell phone videos showing the same scene from multiple angles. The jury watched Carmen identify herself clearly repeatedly. They watched Vasquez dismiss her. They watched her hands stay visible, her movements slow and deliberate. They watched Sophia's face crumble as her mother was handcuffed. The defense tried to argue reasonable suspicion based on area intelligence. Rachel tore it apart in cross-examination. No intelligence reports produced. No documentation of threats. No explanation for why a woman with a federal badge offering to have her identity verified through official dispatch constituted reasonable suspicion of immigration violations. Then the defense attorney made his mistake. He tried to explain Fourth Amendment law to Carmen during her testimony, speaking slowly, condescendingly, as if she were a layperson who couldn't possibly understand legal concepts like Terry stops and reasonable suspicion. Carmen let him finish. Then she leaned forward slightly. I'm familiar with Terry versus Ohio, she said. Her voice was calm, precise. And Tennessee versus Garner, and Warren versus United States. I have a Juris Doctor from UC Berkeley School of Law Constitutional Law focus. I passed the California bar exam in 2011. So when I tell you that this detention violated clearly established constitutional rights, I'm not speaking as a layperson. I'm speaking as an attorney who documented every legal violation in real time while your clients were illegally holding me. The room went silent. Even the court reporters stopped typing for a moment. The defense had no response. The prosecution called a child psychologist who'd evaluated Sophia. The doctor testified about PTSD, symptoms, nightmares, anxiety attacks triggered by seeing federal vehicles or uniformed officers. About a 12-year-old girl who now feared that any time her mother left for work, she might not come back. About trauma that would require years of therapy to process. Carmen's testimony lasted 2 days. Calm, precise, professional. She recounted her career, her commendations, the community she'd served. She described the detention in exact detail, the fear of watching her daughter cry while 3 agents treated her like a criminal. She explained how she'd used her legal training to mentally document every constitutional violation as it happened, knowing she'd need to prove it later. The jury deliberated for 8 days. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdict in a steady voice that carried to every corner of the packed courtroom. We find the defendants liable on all counts. The damages phase began immediately. Expert witnesses testified about the long-term psychological impact, the career disruption, the violation of constitutional rights so fundamental that punitive damages were warranted to send a clear message. The jury awarded $17.8 million, $12.3 million in compensatory damages, $5.5 million in punitive damages. The courtroom erupted. Carmen closed her eyes, held Sophia's hand. The number didn't matter as much as what it represented: validation. Accountability, a public record that would exist forever. The consequences moved quickly after the verdict. Derek Vasquez was suspended pending internal investigation. Linda Tran was reassigned to desk duty processing paperwork in an office with no field authority. Marcus Cole resigned 2 weeks after the jury decision, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew why. The Department of Justice opened a pattern and practice review of ICE operations in Southern California. Within 3 months, 14 additional complaints surfaced spanning 5 years, all involving allegations of racial profiling and unlawful detention during immigration sweeps. The cases had been filed, documented, and quietly buried in administrative processes that led nowhere. Carmen's trial had made them impossible to ignore. Policy changes followed. New requirements for supervisor approval before any detention. Mandatory verification through official channels before any arrest. Body camera footage, subject to quarterly review. Training modules on constitutional rights and federal law enforcement hierarchy. The reforms wouldn't fix everything, but they were a start, written in language specific enough to create accountability. Carmen retired from the U.S. Marshal Service 6 months after the verdict. 18 years of service. Commendations. Respect. A pension. But the uniform had become a reminder of how the system she'd served had failed her when it mattered most. She used part of the settlement to open the Reyes Justice Project, a legal aid clinic specializing in immigration detention cases and civil rights violations. She hired 3 attorneys who believed in the work more than the paycheck, 2 paralegals who knew what systemic injustice looked like from personal experience, and a victim advocate who understood trauma. The clinic operated pro bono for families who couldn't afford representation and wouldn't have known where to find it. In 2 years, the Reyes Justice Project won 23 out of 25 cases. Each victory was small in isolation. A wrongful detention overturned a family, reunited a rights violation, compensated, but together they represented something larger. The possibility that one person's refusal to accept injustice quietly could create space for others to fight back. Target installed a small plaque in the north parking lot where Carmen had been detained. Bronze. Simple. The inscription read, "Injustice witnessed is injustice documented." No names, no date. Just a reminder that cameras and witnesses and people willing to pay attention could turn a routine Saturday afternoon into accountability. Sophia turned 14. She was applying to pre-law programs, already researching constitutional law courses, already talking about following her mother into a career that merged law enforcement and legal advocacy. The nightmares had lessened, though they hadn't disappeared. Therapy helped. Time helped. Watching her mother transform trauma into purpose helped most of all. Carmen never returned to that target, but every Saturday driving Sophia to basketball practice at the rec center funded partially by settlement money, she passed the parking lot and remembered. Not with bitterness, not with satisfaction, just with the quiet knowledge that some lines once crossed demand consequences. And some fights once started don't end with a verdict. They end with changed systems, protected rights, and the next generation learning that justice isn't something you hope for. It's something you build. Carmen turned personal trauma into a legal clinic that's won 23 out of 25 cases for families who had nowhere else to turn. If you believe stories like this need to be told, if you think accountability matters, share this video. And subscribe because tomorrow's story is just as important as today's. California summers still shine on Target parking lots. Families still load groceries into their cars. Kids still argue about snacks in back seats. The world moves forward the way it always does, ordinary and indifferent, until something forces it to pause and reckon with what happened in spaces we thought were safe. Carmen Reyes drew a line that summer afternoon. Not just for herself, not just for Sophia. For everyone who'd ever been told to prove they belonged in their own country, in their own neighborhood, in their own skin. The federal government learned what it costs when authority mistakes power for immunity. Body cameras don't lie, witnesses don't forget. And some people refuse to be silenced, even when silence would be easier and more profitable. Every Saturday morning, Carmen drives past that parking lot on the way to Sophia's basketball practice. Her daughter sits beside her. The plaque is small enough that most people don't notice it, but it's there, permanent, a reminder that power underestimated is still power. Tomorrow's story matters just as much as this one.